Here we are with FlexiCast, or Newscast, as we like to call it.
You can't say FlexiCast. It sounds like something you'd get at an orthopaedic clinic.
Well, it's a moving subject, smorgasbord, and Adam has recently had a hit by having a quiz at the start of weekly newscast.
He loves a quiz.
Weekday newscast. And he asked what was the biggest social media platform, which I've no idea. Oh, I didn't. Anyway, so our quiz is who was the last chancellor to go to China. When I first saw this, I answered George Osborne.
Now, I don't think it was. I think it was actually Philip Hammond was the answer in 2017. But had it been George Osborne, then I could have told you about the trip I went on with George Osborne when I was political editor to China. When he used that trip to warn about the dangers of Brexit. He sat down to do an interview in China with me and he said, everybody's house price will fall immediately. There will be a severe economic shock. This was a long time before the actual referendum, but it caused all sorts of ructions at home. And he talked about the stability of the pound and all sorts of other things. What you might not know about that visit is the thing I really remember is that there was this big sort of ceremonial lunch on a golden boat on some sort of beautiful lake in the middle of in China. And during our interview, the golden boat, do you want to know what happened? Or am I just banging on?
No, I said it was FlexiCast because we're so far away from the news. We have to give it a new name.
So the Treasury, in their quite understandable consideration to want to make this look fabulous, they wanted to make the interview look amazing, and it was quite an overcast day at this beautiful location in China, but it was very grey and foggy. They had arranged for this golden boat where the ceremonial lunch was to take place, which is a whole other story, to be in the background of the shot, floating around in a lake. However, what do boats do on lakes?
They drift.
They drift. So during the whole of our interview, as I remember it, maybe with a tiny bit of artistic license, just out of my eye line and definitely out of earshot, there was a Foreign Office apparatchik talking Chinese very, very loudly, instructing the driver, the pilot, as I think they were called, of that particular boat, to move slightly back or slightly forwards or slightly left or slightly right in order that the Chancellor remained framed up in a beautiful interview shot with said golden boat in the background.
Well, it's a very, very nice vignette.
Well, it's a ludicrous thing. It's a sort of ludicrous little picture of sometimes how our trade works.
Well, Rachel Reeves has gone to China.
It would be very funny to see if anything she does there is in front of the same golden boat.
Well, certainly it's creating as many headlines, this trip, as that one you're talking about. So we'll discuss that on Saturday's Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Laura in the studio.
And it's Paddy in the studio.
And it is Saturday, and we are talking about China for a good, serious reason, because Rachel Reeves is off on her travels, trying to, warm up the connections in order to do business with China, which is, a massive, mega economy that she believes very strongly the UK cannot ignore. It's the world's second biggest economy, and the UK's fourth largest single trading partner. But she goes there at a pretty sticky time when her political opponents are saying she shouldn't have gone at all.
Yes, she says not engaging with China is no choice at all. She's written her own article in the papers today, which I've read. And here is Rachel Reeves explaining why she's there and talking about the recent turbulence on UK financial markets.
There's undoubtedly been moves in global financial markets over the last few days. I'm not going to provide a running commentary on that, but what I would say is that the fiscal rules that I set out in my budget in October are non-negotiable, and growth is the number one mission of this government to make our country better off. And that's why I'm in China, to unlock tangible benefits for British businesses exporting and trading around the world.
Now, when she talks about global turbulence here, that means the borrowing costs for the government hitting a 16-year high and a very noticeable fall in the value of the pound. So these are not insignificant moves.
And they're not limited to the UK, say supporters and some independent analysts. There is an argument, this Liz Truss too, that's a political argument.
Correct.
If you speak, as I've done, to the bond market insiders, they say there's a downer in the bond markets for everyone's debt, thanks very much indeed, including the UK. It's pinned on, actually, this situation where good news is bad news. There's growth in the United States, there's growth in the jobs market, meaning the outlook for cutting interest rates has changed, and it looks like interest rates could stay higher higher for longer. That has an almost automatic effect on selling debt because competitively you get the same rate if you're just leaving your money in a bank. So basically speaking, the big brains of bonds would say that the UK's caught up in a debt changing view on debt. But the UK does have its own structural problems, including stubborn inflation. The outlook for interest rates here is also changed a bit. And crucially, the cost of servicing the UK debt is going up, which takes away Rachel Reeves' fiscal headroom, which means she might have no money or too little money and have to raise more.
And that's the important political point, which increases her difficulty. Essentially, the cost of borrowing going up gobbles up more of the Treasury's pie. And that means either would she raise taxes again? She ain't going to do that, or she certainly doesn't want to do that. Or is she going to have to tell her cabinet colleagues that actually they're going to have to squeeze even more out of their budgets, some of which are already looking incredibly tight? And that's why it's become such an acute political dilemma, really. I think the government's hope is, look, that this will settle down. These costs go up and down, markets go up and down, currencies go up and down. They'll be hoping this is not a permanent change in the terrain that they're dealing with. But don't forget, it's not just the pressure on government budgets, it's also that the number one promise to the country and the number one hope of this government is that before too long, people will start to feel a bit more flush. The cost of living crisis that many people really had a hard time should start to ease off. Hopefully everybody will feel a bit more chipper and therefore they'll be a bit more inclined to feel cheerful about their government. But it is massively, massively, massively important to this government that the economy becomes more prosperous. But I think this is also a reminder of actually they can't control it all. You know, they can do what they like at home. They can say what they like at home. And the decisions that are made in number 11 and number 10 are very, very important. But as you said, some of this is related to what's happening in the US. Some of it will be related also to what's happening in China, where Rachel Reeves is. And this is really, really hard stuff.
And also entirely predictable, actually, because we could go back to a newscast just before the general election was called, in which we said, if Rachel Reeves becomes Chancellor, she will inherit an absolute nightmare in tray. We said that before. She then waited between July and October, which Alistair Campbell, one of the 1997 New Labour architects, said was an own goal. To give that much time between your arrival in Downing Street and your first budget opened up the country to all sorts of discussions and debates and stooshies. I know you'd like me to say.
I love the word stooshy, just like stramash. But however, people who are in charge now, I think, might politely point out to Alistair Campbell that the way the Office for Budget Responsibility, the economic watchdog, works, they need a couple of months to look at the government's plans before you can actually publish a budget. So there was not a little bit of tittering and people enjoying correcting Alistair Campbell on that particular criticism. And not that anyone in politics would ever like to get one up on each other.
No, and thus correcting me, you know, in a way. It is very interesting context. But nonetheless, this is how it's been going. She's been under pressure for a long time. Now, one of the places she appeared in was Brompton's, a bike shop in China, in Beijing. And last week, we had the boss of Brompton's on Radio 4. He's called Will Butler Adams. He cycled in, as you'd hope. And
for people who don't inhabit the world of W1A, these are the very successful foldy bikes.
Foldy bikes.
Well, they're amazing contraptions, but they are foldy bikes. So for people who have never watched W1A or don't live in part of the country where people have these amazing foldy bikes, they are foldy bikes. And they have a factory in China.
When it goes wrong for you here, there's a future for you in marketing.
I thought you were going to say engineering.
No. So anyway, here is Will Butler Adams basically saying, don't talk the economy down and put national insurance up for business. There's kind of that in a sentence, but you can listen to him from 6 days ago on Radio 4.
From a business perspective, there are a whole load of policies, not least national insurance, London living wage cost our business about 550 grand in the coming year. We had plans to grow to recruit more people. Those are now on hold because we have to take that on the chin. If Keir and his team are really going to kickstart the economy, we're not there yet.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because that clip encapsulates what it must be like to be the Chancellor. Because whatever you do, you're going to have people, even sounding very moderate and very measured there, saying, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. And it's the same with our trip to China, because some people, and including people who are senior in business, would say, of course, the UK Chancellor absolutely should be going to make connections in China. George Osborne did it. Philip Hammond did it. We'd be nuts to ignore that economic superpower and try to make it work for the UK. But on the other side, you've got people who say, hang on a minute, China is not a benign country. It is not a country that wants the UK to succeed in a purely benign way. There are problems with human rights. There are problems in terms of all sorts of things. We know that there have been all sorts of, an uptick, as we've discussed many times, in the kind of threats from state actors that the UK faces. Actually, what are you doing going to go and break bread with the Chinese? So it's a difficult balance. They're not the first government to face it. But it kind of feels to me it's a bit like rinse and repeat this. The arguments that are being made about Rachel Reeves going or not going to China are kind of a rinse and repeat of previous prime ministers and previous chancellors going, where you get particular lobbies saying, don't do it. Other people saying, on you go.
And when this is aired, 50 years from now, by historians saying the world changed in the 2020s after COVID. There was a global realignment happened. Mm-hmm. China, Iran, Russia and North Korea aligned to break American hegemony. Mm-hmm. And that all happened, as was discussed by Dame Laura Koonsberg and Paddy O'Connell back in 2025.
Baron O'Connell,
yeah.
But
but hold on. We've got to end this section with an optimistic note. So the bond market behemoth I spoke to said there is a landing strip for Rachel Reeves. Mm-hmm. Markets often overreact. They're very emotion, really. I know that's not a technical term. But basically...
Yeah, but markets are based on sentiment, aren't they? As well as numbers on a screen. In fact, perhaps even more so.
So some people are telling us that they've overreacted. And they've also said that if Rachel Reeves does get growth, and if inflation does come down, and if UK interest rates come down, then actually the situation for her is better. And also politically, if they do cut NHS waiting lists, that is a massive win with the public. So I think we're ending this section because we've got a scoop from you to deal with. But there's a lot to talk about with Rachel Reeves. Most of the headlines are negative, and I've just inserted the view from one of the most famous bond market people in history.
The latest official health check on how Rachel Reeves is doing in her managing of the nation's bank balance is the Office for Budget Responsibility's latest forecast. They'll give us an update on March the 26th on whether or not Rachel Reeves is still on track to meet her own rules on borrowing. The so-called fiscal rules, which lots of people think are political creations, and they're a nonsense because chancellors just end up changing them anyway. Perish the thought. But that, I suppose, is the next time she'll get something of an official thumbs up or thumbs down. In this week, where there has been huge amounts of noise and clamour and conversation about exactly what is happening with the social media behemoths, to use the word of the day, enter in one of the British players in this whole world that many audiences will have become familiar with, actually for all the wrong reasons. Ian Russell, the father of 14-year-old Molly Russell from London, who took her own life almost 5 years ago. Ian discovered that she'd been viewing thousands of images online promoting suicide and self-harm. And he has become one of the most prominent, one of the most well-respected, I think, campaigners in this whole world of trying to improve online safety for children.
Yes, and you have an interview with him. And not only that, I've read that he's written a letter as a dad to Keir Starmer as a dad.
So he's written an incredibly powerful letter to Keir Starmer. We're recording this at 2:30 on Saturday. It was sent to Downing Street this morning. And he's doing two things, I think. Ian Russell is imploring Keir Starmer to fix what he sees as the very important loopholes in what's known as the Online Safety Act. We've discussed it many times, but the government introduced what looked like groundbreaking legislation to try to combat this problem and stop particularly young people, but not just young people, but particularly to stop young people seeing content that was harmful. Yeah. And Ian Russell and other safety campaigners believe that legislation, which is being enforced by the regulator Ofcom, essentially has got lots and lots of holes in it. That yes, it's important. Yes, it was a good start, but there are lots and lots of holes. For example, there aren't specific references to suicide. Some of the codes don't cover live streaming. It's not quite clear what it's going to do about chatbots, which of course are becoming a very big thing online. So Ian is making the point very forcefully that as he sees it, the Ofcom codes are a disaster, to use his word, that they need urgent fixing as they're coming in, and that basically the government has to crack on with that as a matter of urgency. The second point that he's making, as he describes, in his phrase, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg as reckless billionaires who are turning away from what has been progress over the years towards safety. They're turning back to the internet becoming a less regulated space, where in the name of freedom of speech, what will actually happen instead is a worse and worse torrent of harmful content, and to use his phrase.
Yeah, and fakery and disinformation and ill-informed billionaires whipping up a situation which they don't understand. So here, can we hear your interview?
This week, the gloves are off, I think, mainly because the tech chiefs have announced U-turns on moderation and platform policies that lead to greater safety. Hitherto in this process, they've been really engaged and they've said all the right things, and it looks like they've been wanting to go along and make their platforms safer and engage with the regulators and engage with the new legislation. But there's been a complete U-turn. And one announcement this week, the announcement that Mark Zuckerberg made in particular, just leads me to believe that Meta is turning its platforms back towards the platforms that Molly saw in the last months of her life. Back towards the way that they were run, back towards the harmful content that Molly was exposed to, and therefore more children will be exposed to in the future. And by turning the platforms backwards, away from safety, Mark Zuckerberg has changed the game fundamentally and shown that the platforms aren't really here to play safe.
And Ian has really become an authority on this kind of issue. You know, he's devoted so much of his life in the last few years to try to work with the government on the kinds of measures that they're trying to take. But I think it's really notable that he has chosen to put his voice into this whole debate just at the moment when everyone's saying, how should politicians deal with Musk and Zuckerberg? How on earth are these platforms going to interact with governments? What on earth is Elon Musk really up to? Are him and Zuckerberg just trying to suck up to the new White House administration? Or are we all somehow caught up in this sort of race between these tech billionaires to see who's going to be the most powerful of all, you know? And you just, I think, have to remember the size of these platforms. You know, we've got some numbers here. Facebook has got 3 billion monthly active users. Instagram has 2 billion monthly active users. X has 600 million active users. You know, these are huge platforms. And this week, Meta said, you know, one of the announcements it made, it was going to get rid of fact checkers in the US.
Yeah.
But they're not individual, you know, these platforms don't run country by country. And I think there is increasing alarm, as we've heard there from Ian, among some of the people who've worked so hard, so long to try to actually make things safer and better. I should read you what Ofcom and what Number 10 have said in response to Ian's letter, because it is very strong and he has made a very emotional appeal. A Number 10 spokesperson has said, the Prime Minister thanks Ian Russell for the letter received this morning. Alongside many other families and parents, he's shown immense bravery through the most tragic of circumstances to campaign for children's online safety. We're grateful for their contributions and we'll continue to work with them to get this right. The government is committed to ensuring online safety for children. Social media platforms must step up to their responsibilities. And just forgive me, I should include this response from Ofcom, because Ofcom is the regulator that's producing the rules on this.
Very badly criticised.
And they've been very badly criticised. An Ofcom spokesperson told us, we recognise the profound pain caused by harmful content. Our deepest sympathies remain with Ian Russell and all those who've suffered unimaginable loss. That's why we're doing everything in our power to hold platforms to account and create a safer life online, and victims' voices will continue to be at the heart of our work. The other point they go on to say, which is worth newscasters knowing, is that the codes that Ofcom has been producing are still not out there fully developed and fully in force. Their supporters would say, and I think a lot of people in Whitehall would say, look, we have to wait and see whether or not these things are actually going to work. And the Department for Technology is not in any hurry to look at new legislation for that reason. However, I think online safety campaigners look at what's come out and say, we know already that this isn't enough. It's a very, very difficult and delicate issue. We've got Peter Kyle, the Technology Secretary, with us tomorrow morning, which feels rather timely.
Well, it certainly does. I mean, it's interesting, this phrase fact-checking. There's never been a better time to check facts now, it seems to me, the assault on truth. And this is a work done for a lot by our colleague Mariana Spring. And one of the questions you can ask yourself is, how does this post I'm reading make me feel? And if the answer is very angry, that is the way that it's proven that you get more engagement of users. If I can make you angry online, you're going to engage more. You're going to send it to all your friends who share the same concerns. Let's say they are concerns about grooming gangs, and you're rightly concerned about them. But if you're sent misinformation about it, which you then share, then of course that means it would be even more important than ever to have had fact checkers in the situation. So Ian Russell used the phrase U-turn by the big companies, but there's been a big U-turn on the truth. Around the world, the issues we care the most about, there's a whole industry of deliberate disinformation happening. And many of our friends, our neighbours, people we go to work with, are consuming information in all the free ways they can. And one of the things it's doing is polluting the well.
And I think what campaigners that you talk to about this would tell you is, one of their frustrations is not that, oh, the internet's a terrible, terrible thing. That's not what they're saying at all. The internet, they believe, is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But there are quite simple ways that the tech companies could change the whirring machines in the background of their computers so that kind of content was not being promoted. So, changing the algorithms. And when you talk to people like Ian Russell and other campaigners, that's what they'd say. They say, look, the tech companies have got the kit to make these changes, but they are using their platforms to pump us all with the kind of content that we enjoy, whether because it makes us angry or it makes us super happy or it makes us laugh. But they could correct, essentially, they believe, to stop promoting harmful content in a more meaningful way. And their worry is that the government basically has not gone far enough with the legislation that they introduced, even though, at the time it was even dreamt up of, the Online Safety Act, as it now is, was considered to be completely groundbreaking. It took years to get it on the statute books. I don't think anybody in that world would say, oh, we're worse off having it. But the question is whether or not the government is really grappling with the reality of what the technology now is compared to what it was 5-6 years ago when this process was all started. I
feel a Mariana episode coming on with just an update on all the tricks that are being used to fool me as a user. I'm not saying I can't be fooled. I can be fooled by an SMS telling me I have to pay more for the package that I didn't order. Those scams.
But it's easy done, and that's if you look at crime figures, the big soaring bit is fraud and online fraud, because you're not stupid to be caught by a scam. The scammers and technology is incredibly clever.
So we'll update tips on spotting fakery in the coming weeks. We'll listen and watch to Ian Russell and Peter Kyle on the Laura Koonsberg programme.
What have you got tomorrow?
So, we've got Neil Kinnock on.
Won't that be interesting? Labour legend, Labour veteran.
If only we could hire someone to ask the right questions of him, I'm sure it could be very interesting. But nonetheless, it's a great booking by the team at Radio 4. We look forward very much to meeting him. And we hope you'll join us tomorrow when Henry's back.
Henry will be back with us tomorrow for Sunday's newscast. We hope you've enjoyed Saturday's newscast. And we'll see you tomorrow. Remember, let us know what you think. I feel like this year, newscasters have maybe been, so far, slightly shy about letting us know what they think.
Oh, you've started it now. Anyway, thank you for listening and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Newscast from the BBC.